The wind didn't just cross the Wyoming high plains. It stalked them. It scraped the land raw, worrying the dirt and stone like a predator worrying bone, and it shoved grit deep into the skin of anything unlucky enough to be standing in its way. It was the kind of wind that didn't care if you lived or died. It only cared that you felt it before it finished with you. Mara walked straight into that wind with her head down and her body angled forward, as if she were bracing against a living enemy that could see her, smell her weakness, and had already decided she wouldn't last. She had lost track of how many days she'd been walking. 3, maybe, 4, time. Stopped behaving properly when every step hurt and the cold slid into you like knives. Her boots were finished. The thin soles had split wide, flapping uselessly, and she felt every jagged stone and frozen rut bite straight through into her feet. Her left heel had been rubbed raw days ago. The blister burst somewhere behind her, and now her sock was stiff with dried blood, stuck to her skin like it belonged there. In her arms, she clutched a small bundle of clothes wrapped tight in a rough shawl that smelled of lye soap and old tobacco. It was all she had left in the world, everything she carried from the life she was running from. To the west, the mountains rose sharp and cruel, like broken teeth biting into the sky. Snow already clung to their peaks, white and unforgiving, promising a winter that would kill anyone, foolish or unlucky enough to face it without walls. Above her, the sky sagged low and bruised, a dull purple gray that pressed down on the land like a heavy hand. There was no sun, no warmth, only a flat, merciless light that showed things exactly as they were and offered nothing else. She knew with a certainty that sat cold in her chest that she wouldn't survive another night out here. Her knee struck the frozen ground when she stumbled again, pain flaring bright and sharp. A cry leapt up her throat, but she swallowed it hard. Crying wasted warmth. Crying wasted water. Crying didn't save anyone. She pushed herself back to her feet, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped her bundle. "You cannot stop," she told herself under her breath. "If you stop, the cold takes you." Silver Creek wasn't far behind her, but the memory of it still burned like a fresh wound. A place where men lost their money and women lost their choices. A place that smiled while it took things from you, and then blamed you for being lighter afterward. She had rented a room in a boarding house that pretended not to notice how a woman paid her rent, right up until the day the place changed hands. The new proprietor had arrived with a Bible, tucked under one arm, and a ledger under the other, her mouth pinched tight with righteousness. She decided Mara was bad for business, not respectable. The word still tasted bitter. Respectability was something Mara had stopped owning at 16, and the world had never let her. Forget it. As the afternoon light thinned and bled into a watery dusk, she saw it. A thin ribbon of smoke, rising ahead of her, faint and fragile, nearly torn apart by the wind. She stopped walking for the first time in hours, afraid it might vanish if she moved too fast. But it stayed. A gray line twisting upward against the heavy sky. Where there was smoke, there was fire. And where there was fire, there was a roof. Hope, small and dangerous, flared in her chest. She forced her legs to move faster, stumbling toward the shape that slowly emerged from the gloom. A cabin. Rough-hewn logs weathered to the color of iron, stacked tight against the cold. A small corral stood off to one side, 2 horses inside it, their backs to the wind, tails flicking. No other cabins nearby. No neighbors. No help if she chose wrong. But it wasn't the open plains, and right now that was enough. She reached the door. There was no porch, just a single flat stone dragged into place as a step. She hesitated, her hand hovering inches from the rough wood. She knew what men thought when they saw a woman alone on foot. No horse, no baggage, worn down, desperate, easy to use. The cold had worked its way deep into her bones now, turning her thoughts slow and heavy. She knocked. The sound was barely more than a whisper under the storm. She waited, teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She knocked again, harder this time. "Please," she whispered against the door, the word tearing out of her like something alive. "Please." A latch clicked from inside. The door opened slow, pulled inward. A tall man filled the frame, blocking the orange glow of a fire behind him. He wore a heavy wool coat, dark and thick, and a battered hat pulled low over his brow. In his right hand he held a Winchester rifle, not aimed but ready, like an extension of his arm. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. His face told a long story without words. Hard miles. Wind and sun carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth. A scar cut from his temple down into his beard, pale against weathered skin. He looked to be in his mid-30s, maybe. But there was something older in the way he stood. His eyes were dark and unreadable. Mara tried to speak again, but her throat was too dry. The warmth spilling out from the cabin hit her all at once, making her sway. The world tilted. "Help me," she rasped. The man didn't move right away. His gaze slid past her, scanning the empty horizon behind her, checking for shadows, for riders, for anything that might follow. "A husband," he said slowly. "A pimp, a posse?" He saw nothing but barren land and blowing snow. He looked back at her then, really looked. At her torn shoes, her shaking hands, the blue creeping into her lips. Something flickered across his face. Not pity, maybe annoyance, maybe resignation. He stepped back a single inch and lowered the rifle. "Come in before you let all the heat out," he said. His voice sounded like gravel under a wagon wheel. Mara stumbled across the threshold. Her legs gave out, and she pitched forward. He didn't catch her, but he grabbed her arm and braced her against the door frame, strong fingers biting just enough to keep her upright. "Sit," he ordered, nodding toward a small table near the stove. The cabin was one room, clean, sparse, warm. A cast-iron stove glowed, red in the corner, ticking softly. A narrow bed was pushed against the far wall. Saddles hung from pegs. Everything had its place. Everything was useful. He handed her a tin cup of cold water. She drank too fast, coughing as it burned its way down. He ladled stew from a pot, thick and steaming, into a chipped bowl and set it in front of her. "Eat slow," he said. She tried, but hunger had other plans. When she finished, wiping the bowl clean with shaking fingers, he finally asked, "Where'd you come from?" "Silver Creek? That's 3 days' walk. Maybe 4. She stared at her bleeding knuckles. "I had nowhere else." He watched her like a man reading sign on the ground, taking in the bruises on her wrists, the way she flinched when his boots shifted, the way she kept her eyes lowered as if expecting a blow. "You're running from something," he said. Mara didn't answer. He sighed, quiet and tired. "Name's Eli Turner." "Mara," she said. Eli crossed his arms. "You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow morning, you head for the stage road. I'll point you the way." Her stomach dropped. The stage road was 2 more days on foot. She knew she wouldn't survive it. She needed to stay. She needed warmth and food and walls. She had nothing to trade except the one thing men always wanted. She stood slowly, legs trembling. "Mr. Turner," she whispered. He looked up. Her voice cracked. "I'm not worth much, but I'll do anything for a roof over my head." The room went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Eli's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. For a heartbeat, Mara thought he might throw her back out into the storm. Instead, his voice came low and sharp. "No," he said. "Not here." And the look in his eyes wasn't desire. It was anger. Anger at a world that had taught her that was all she had left to offer. The storm pressed harder against the cabin as night settled in. The wind shoving at the walls like it meant to tear them apart plank by plank. Loose snow hissed along the window frame, finding every crack, every weakness. Inside, the fire snapped softly. Orange light breathing against the iron door of the stove. Mara sat close to it, arms wrapped tight around herself, letting the warmth soak in slow, watching the glow like it might disappear if she looked away too long. Eli moved around the cabin with quiet purpose. He hung his coat on a peg, checked the horses through the small side window, adjusted the stack of damp wood beside the stove so it would dry faster. He didn't look at her much. That somehow felt worse than staring. Most men stared. Most men measured. Eli Turner had looked at her once, truly looked, and then turned away like the sight troubled him. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. "You can take the bed," he said at last, nodding toward the narrow cot pushed against the wall. "I'll sleep in the chair." She shook her head quickly. "I'll sleep on the floor. Not in this cold. Take the bed." His tone left no room for argument. Mara hesitated, then rose slowly and touched the edge of the mattress, as if making sure it was real. It was firm and clean, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. not of cheap perfume and stale. Cigars like the rooms she'd known in Silver Creek. She sat on the corner, careful, unsure she had the right. Eli dropped into the wooden chair near the door, one boot hooked on a rung, leaning back the way a man did when he'd ended 1,000 days the same way. His rifle rested against the wall within easy reach. Mara swallowed. "You don't have to stay awake," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "I do. Why?" His answer came after a pause. "Because someone knocked on my door in the middle of a storm and told me she was willing to give up her dignity just to keep from freezing." His voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "So I'm keeping watch. For both of us." Shame burned hot under her skin. She stared at the floorboards. "I didn't know what else to offer." "You shouldn't have to offer anything," he said. "Shelter's shelter. A person either gives it or they don't." She lay back and pulled the thin blanket over herself. Exhaustion dragged her under fast, heavy as iron. Her last clear thought, before sleep claimed her, was that she shouldn't have survived this long. Maybe she was only still breathing because she'd found this cabin. And this man, instead of another. She woke to the sound of horses. Not Eli's, more than one, moving fast. Eli was already on his feet at the window, peering out from behind the thin curtain. His whole posture had changed. Shoulders tight. Hands ready, breath shallow. Mara pushed herself upright, heart already racing. "What is it?" "Riders," he said. "3?" Cold spread inside her like spilled water. "They found me." Eli turned his head just enough to look at her. "Who?" She hugged her arms to her chest. "I told you I left Silver Creek. I didn't tell you who I was running from." His eyes stayed on her. "You're telling me now?" Her voice shook. "A man named Wade Carter. He runs the biggest gambling hall in town. People owe him. He collects however he wants. I worked upstairs. When I tried to leave, he sent men after me, said I was property until my debt was paid." Something dark moved through Eli's expression, tightening the room. "Are those his men?" She nodded once. Eli crossed to his rifle, checked the chamber with practiced hands, set his jaw. "They won't take you." Her breath caught. "You don't know what he'll do if they find me here." "I don't care what he'll do," Eli said. "I'm not handing you over." The horses stopped outside. Boots hit frozen ground, heavy and confident. Voices rose, rough and amused, the sound of men who believed the world bent for them. A fist slammed against the door. "Turner, open up!" Mara froze. They knew his name. Eli didn't answer. He stepped between her and the door, solid as a wall. "Go behind the bed," he said quietly. "Stay low." She crawled behind the cot, heart hammering so loud she felt it in her throat. Outside, the men laughed. "Come on, Eli," one called. "We know she came this way. Boss wants her back. She ain't worth dying over." Another voice chimed in, lazy and cruel. "We'll even leave you a cut for the trouble." Eli didn't move. The cabin stayed silent. Patience snapped outside. "Last chance, Turner. Step aside." Eli raised his rifle. "You boys take one more kick at that door," he warned. Voice steady and dangerous. "And you won't be walking back to Silver Creek." A cold chuckle answered him. "You always did think you were better than the rest of us. Fine. Have it your way." Boots shifted. Snow crunched. Just as Mara dared to breathe, a gunshot tore through the night. She screamed and ducked as the bullet punched through the upper corner of the door, splintering wood across the room. Eli dropped to one knee, calm as stone, and fired back through the broken frame. A man outside cried out in pain. Everything erupted at once, shouting, running feet, the metallic sound of guns being drawn. Mara pressed herself flat as Eli stood his ground. Shoulders squared, rifle steady, protecting her with the calm of a man who'd already decided how this would end. He glanced back once. "You're safe," he said. "No matter what happens tonight." Another shot slammed into the door. Another scream cut the air. The night turned violent, and there was no walking away from it. The night dissolved into chaos. Gunfire cracked across the frozen plains, each shot echoing back off the land and slamming into the cabin walls like thunder. Smoke stung the air inside as splinters rained down from fresh bullet holes. Mara pressed herself tight against the floor, hands clamped over her ears. praying with a desperation that hurt that Eli wouldn't fall. Outside, men shouted over one another. Voices sharp and angry, carried and twisted by the wind. Orders were barked. Curses followed. Boots crunched in widening circles as they spread out. Testing the cabin, looking for weakness. Eli fired again, measured and controlled. The muzzle flash lit his face for a heartbeat, revealing not fear and not rage, but focus. The expression of a man who had already chosen what he was willing to lose, and what he wasn't. A bullet tore through the window, shattering glass in a spray that glittered cruelly before hitting the floor. Cold air rushed in, biting and sudden. Mara gasped, her breath fogging hard. Eli moved without hesitation, crossing the room in 2 strides, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind the stove. "Stay low," he said, eyes never stopping their sweep of the cabin. "They won't leave," she whispered, shaking. "Not until they have me." "They're not getting you," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." The shouting outside grew louder, closer. Snow crunched in steady patterns now as the men circled, hunting angles, probing. Fear rose in Mara's chest until it felt like it might break her ribs. She tried to speak again, but the words stuck. Eli crouched beside her, his presence solid, grounding. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "I've dealt with men like this before. They're worse than you." "Think," she said. "Wade Carter doesn't forget. If his men die out there, he'll come himself." Eli's jaw tightened. "He can come," he said. "I'm not handing a woman over to a man who thinks she's property." Then, suddenly, silence. It fell so fast it felt wrong, like the world had stopped breathing. Eli froze. Mara did too. The wind still howled, but the men were quiet now. A new voice drifted through the dark, smooth and controlled, cutting clean through the storm. "Eli Turner." Mara's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. It didn't need to shout. Men listened to Wade. Carter because they understood exactly what happened when you didn't. Eli didn't answer. Wade went on, calm as ice. "I think we need to have a talk." Mara's fingers closed around Eli's sleeve. "You can't fight him," she whispered. "He'll kill you." Eli looked at her, eyes steady. "I'm not fighting for him," he said. "I'm fighting for you." Wade's voice sharpened. "You have something that belongs to me. Send her out, and this ends clean. Keep her, and I burn that cabin to the ground with you in it." Eli rose slowly, rifle ready, and moved toward the window, staying just out of sight. He peered through a narrow gap in the wall. Outside, Wade sat tall on a dark horse, snow swirling around him. 2 men flanked him. In the distance, 3 others lay wounded in the snow, groaning softly. Eli raised his voice. "You're not getting her back." A cold laugh answered him. "You think you can protect her?" "I can," Eli said. "And I will," Wade's patience snapped. "This is your last chance." Eli stepped back and looked at Mara. Fear was written across her face, but beneath it was something fragile and new, belief. He pressed his revolver into her, shaking hands. "If anyone gets past me," he said, "you shoot." Her breath caught. "I've never—" "You will," he said. "If you have to. I trust you." The words hit harder than any blow she'd ever taken. Outside, Wade snapped his fingers. 2 men dismounted and advanced, guns drawn. Wade stayed mounted, watching, waiting. Eli took position by the shattered window. The first man crept too close. Eli fired once. The man dropped without a sound. The second ran for cover behind the corral fence, bullets kicking up snow around him as Eli forced him down. Wade shouted orders, sharp and furious. Mara crouched lower, gripping the revolver, her heart pounding so loud she thought it might give her away. Then wood cracked behind her. She spun just as the back door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges. A 4th man burst through, gun raised, eyes wild. "Boss is gonna be happy," he said, grinning. Mara lifted the revolver, hands shaking too hard to aim. Before the man could take another step, Eli slammed into him from the side. They crashed into the wall, fighting hard and fast. The gun skidded across the floor. Eli drove his shoulder into the man's chest, throwing him down, then ended it with a single brutal punch. The man went still. Eli hauled Mara up by the arm. "We end this now." He turned toward the front door, rifle reloaded, eyes burning with resolve. Together, they stepped back out into the freezing night. The cold hit them like a wall as they stepped outside, the wind tearing at their clothes and dragging snow across the ground in long, hissing sheets. Wade Carter sat straight-backed on his dark horse, the animal stamping and snorting beneath him, breath rolling from its nostrils like smoke. The lantern light caught Wade's face just enough to show his pale eyes narrowing, sharp and calculating, when he saw Eli standing in front of the cabin with Mara just behind his shoulder. Blood stained the snow nearby where his men lay wounded, groaning low. Reminders that this night hadn't gone the way he'd planned. "You're making a mistake, Turner," Wade said, his voice smooth, almost conversational, as if they were discussing weather instead of lives. "No," Eli replied evenly. "You did." Wade's mouth twitched, irritation breaking through his calm. "You think this ends here?" he asked. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. Wade reached for his gun. Eli fired first. The shot cracked clean through the night. Wade jerked in the saddle and slid down hard into the snow, landing with a dull final thud. Silence followed, sudden and complete, like the land itself was holding its breath. The remaining men stared at their fallen leader, then at Eli, his rifle still raised, his stance unshaken. "Pick him up," Eli said, his voice carrying clear across the open ground. "Take him back to Silver Creek, and tell anyone who asks that. She's not his property." She never was. No one argued. Fear had replaced confidence now. They lifted Wade's body, hauled him onto a horse, and rode off into the darkness, their shapes swallowed by the storm. The wind eased just a little. Snow began to fall softer, slower. Mara stood beside Eli, her whole body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the weight of everything that had almost happened and didn't. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk your life for me?" Eli looked tired now, the fight drained out of him, leaving only honesty. "Because you walked through a storm believing the only thing you had to offer was yourself," he said quietly. "And I won't let the world teach you that lie again." Something broke open inside her chest, warm and painful all at once. Hope. Real hope. The kind she thought had been beaten out of her years ago. Snowflakes drifted down around. Them gentle now, settling on the dark earth and turning it silver. "What happens now?" she asked. Eli looked at the cabin, then at the sky, then back at her. "Now you stay," he said. "Until you're warm, until you're strong, and after that we figure it out together." Tears burned her eyes as she nodded. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Truly safe. Eli turned toward the door and finally allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Let's get inside," he said. "Storm's easing, but you're still freezing." She followed him back into the cabin, leaving a trail of footprints behind her, marks that the morning sun would freeze into silver and time would eventually erase. But tonight she wasn't running anymore. Tonight she had found a place. She had found a future.